Welcome to the All Together Show with Eric Satz. On this show, you'll hear Eric's unfiltered interviews with interesting and untraditional entrepreneurs who ignored boundaries, followed their instincts and own paths, and are now empowering others to do the same. Subscribe to the show and learn more by visiting alltogether.show. And now, your host, Eric Satz.
My guest today is the founder of investment firm Skybridge Capital, Anthony Scaramucci. Most of us first met the Mooch during his stint as White House Communications Director, a whirlwind 11 days now known across the globe as, what else? A Scaramucci. We talk about the people and place he comes from, being comfortable with mistakes and failure, and finding your balance and knowing your tolerance for risk. I'm also happy to announce that the Skybridge Capital Bitcoin Fund is now available for investment on the Alto platform. And we'll touch on that too. Why Anthony is a believer in Bitcoin and the future of digital currency. So take a listen, hear what Anthony has to share. I really enjoyed this conversation and hope you do too.
This episode of the All Together Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto is a digital, self-directed IRA company modernizing IRA investing. They make it easy and cost-effective for individual investors to access their retirement savings and invest in alternative assets. To learn more, visit altoira.com.
My favorite late night host, David Letterman. My next guest needs no introduction. Anthony Scaramucci, welcome to the All Together Show. Thank you for being here.
Hey, appreciate you having me. Thank you.
So this has to be nerve-wracking for you, by the way, being on the All Together Show, a show that nobody listens to with a host that nobody's heard of. Are you going to be okay?
I think I'm going to be okay, but you're underselling yourself. I mean, you got a great program and you are a erstwhile host. So you're underselling yourself, but no, I'm ready for you. I have a hair advantage, which I like right now. Okay. I'm just squaring myself off with you. Of course.
Yeah, no, I greatly appreciate that. I really do. So the way I typically start is I like to ask you, the guest, to tell us who you are in your own words.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I guess I get to have a little bit of an out-of-the-body experience, I guess. So I don't think anyone has ever asked me that, actually. So let me see. I don't want to frame it from a narrative perspective or a resume perspective. So I'll frame it more ethereally, if you will. I am the product of a blue-collar family, had a reasonably high IQ, and had a lot of drive. And a result of which I had to make a decision if I was going to take a lot of exogenous risk and to push myself directionally to get to where I am today. And then was I going to be able to handle the requisite failure that comes with taking a lots of exogenous risk, and how resilient of a person am I? Because you could really take a lower path of resistance and an easier run at things than the way I've done it.
I don't know if you can see this, my shirt.
Yeah, resilient. Yeah, no, I like it.
I have three of these shirts.
So in conclusion, I'm 57 years old. Life is still a grand experiment to me. I'm very much so enjoying planet Earth, even its trials and tribulations, even my White House firing, the human condition, while parts of it are quite tragic. It is one of the more amazing things, and I feel very blessed. And so I would describe myself in three words then: gratitude, resilience, and enthusiasm. And if you take those three words, that's who I think I am. I could read you my resume and I could tell you about my life experiences, but ultimately I think that's the journey that I've been on. Can I push myself? Can I get over my fear? Can I get over my self-consciousness? You have to do that if you're going to go on television, or if you're going to give a press briefing at the White House or your podcast or whatever. And can I embarrassingly fail, fall on my face, get put through the Shawshank Redemption sewer pipe on the way out of something, then rolled in broken glass after I've been skinned alive and then salted with margarita salt? Can I do all of those things, get up, dust myself off, and get back to work?
Turns out you can.
So it turns out that I can do those things, but they've been very humbling, and they've been a maturation process for me, and I've been made more psychologically aware and more psychologically minded as a result of those experiences. And so I feel blessed for that. It's a really good question, by the way. No one's ever asked me that question, so I give you kudos for that, Sats.
I love that you call me Sats, by the way, because that's what so many people call me. I'd love to understand where that resilience comes from. And so I'd actually love to start with your grandparents. And I'm not going to say any more than that, other than to ask you to tell us about your grandparents.
So it's interesting. I was on this morning, 6-hour difference into Italy, with the mayor of the town that my father's mom and dad came from, Gualdo de Torino, which is in the Provincia of Perugia. So it's just slightly north of Rome, closer to the Adriatic Sea. They left that town in 1920, about 100 years ago. My grandfather was on his second wife. His first wife died from childbirth-related injury. He had the tragedy of having his daughter born and his wife dying. So about 4 years later, he remarried, and he took Celestina Marconi with him to the United States, and he ended up residing in a coal mining town in Plains, Pennsylvania, where, if you understand the triangle of Wilkes-Barre, Lucerne County, and Scranton, it's in that triangle. It was a poor town, coal mining town, lower middle class activity there, but that's where the Italians were emigrating from during that period of time, from the town that he came from, and he was looking for work and looking for an opportunity and thought America could provide that to him. On my mother's side, a little bit more, less classic story, because they were here in the United States in the 1890s. My grandfather was actually born here in the United States. They returned to the town that they came from. And my great-grandfather had made some money. He brought it back with him to the town that he came from, and then he recruited a few people, and about 5 or 6 years later, they returned back to the United States. And of course, the people that they came from was a town. They came from a town called Volterra, but they came to Port Washington, where I grew up. That's where my mother was raised. And so this is the twist of fate. My father's oldest brother is returning from the war as a war veteran. He was wounded in the war. It was a Purple Heart. He was decorated. And the nurse that he met that took care of him, he ended up marrying, and she was from the town of Port Washington. So he's 12 years senior to my dad. He's telling my father, you got to get out of that town. There's more opportunity. There's more economic activity in Port Washington, and it's closer to New York City, and there's more vibrancy. So my dad graduates in 1953. He buys himself a very cheap car, and he drives himself the 200 miles to Port Washington, where he settles. He meets my mother. They get married. They celebrated their 64th year married January 20th.
Nice.
They're unfortunately not in great health at this time. My dad was a tough, chain-smoking, blue-collar worker, but he's 86 now. And unfortunately, he's got a little bit of congestive heart failure and some lung issues related to smoking. My mother is a leukemia survivor. She takes Gleevec every day, but they're alive. They laid the bedrock of a pretty good family. They were blue-collar people. They didn't go to college. My father worked as a crane operator. My mother made his lunch pail. She took care of us. He came home. He's a pretty tough guy. I mean, we got smacked around in that house. He was very strict about eating at certain times, and he had a protocol in his personality. He was also ridiculously scrupulous. So if he got a parking ticket on Main Street, we literally had to walk to the post office and pay the parking ticket by money order. And so many things I took from my dad over the years, but that was one of the things. No funny business, no reason to do anything stupid. We got plenty of money, enough food. The air conditioning goes on in the summer. We had to put it in the window, and the heat goes on in the winter, and that's it. That's it. You don't have to, and you're not trying to impress anybody else. Just go live your life. but it was very important for my parents that we get educated. And when I got into Tufts, my father thought it was Toughs, had no clue. My mother thought Harvard was Hartford Law School. She put the map out, and she had us the Rand McNally map. We were heading for Connecticut to Hartford. So they had no clue. And so weirdly, Eric, that gave me a big opportunity because there were no giant steps that I needed to stand in for. Anything that I did in my career, my parents were very happy with. So that's where I was.
Help me square the circle on this one. Because you talk about blue collar a lot. Mm-hmm. But you use a lot of multisyllabic words that I frequently have to look up. Who are your best friends? From what period of time in your life?
Well, I mean, I live 2 miles from where my parents raised me. I live in a and the lucky thing is there was a sand mine in the town that I grew up in. It took 95 years to mine out that sand. My dad was crane operator there for 42 years. I can take you to that location. Ken Langone, the founder of Home Depot, is a friend of mine. That sand mine closed in 2000. By 2010, it was converted into a public golf course. And at his direction, a group of Italian Americans, myself included, donated money to put a monument there to recognize all the Irish, Welsh, and Italian immigrants that came to the country to mine out that sand. Now, 65% of the concrete in the Manhattan skyline from the years 1905 to 2000 came from my hometown. So sort of proud of that. But also, if you read about Port Washington, it's in the Great Gatsby. The coastline of Port Washington is known as part of the Gold Coast of Long Island. There were beautiful large mansions down there when I was a kid. Almost all of them have been broken up into different lots and restructured into McMansions. So, I mean, the Guggenheim estate is still there. That got converted into a Nassau County museum. I grew up in a very good public school system. There was an affluent community there of suburban people using that town as a bedroom community, going in and out of the city. And so that attracted me. I always thought that would be part of my life. I was a landscaper kid, used to mow the lawns of some of these big houses and say, man, someday I'm going to live in one of those houses. I got to just hustle and work. And so, but the area that I grew up in, like if you came to my mother's house, my father's house, there were small houses, Cape Cod oriented houses, small. We had one full bath, a half bath downstairs, one full bath upstairs, 5 people in the house, totally fine. I would never dishonor my parents by saying I grew up poor. But, the next door neighbor was a New York City fireman. The person down the block was an electrician. They were all sheetrock people. They were people that worked for Verizon, which was actually New York Bell at that time, phone repair people. That was my neighborhood. But when I got to the public school system, there were wealthy kids in that school system, and they were pretty well-educated kids. I guess my best friend at that time was a guy named Todd Magazine. He's gone on to become one of the senior executives at Equinox, and they're having a tough time right now because of the pandemic and SoulCycle. And so he's one of my best friends. Obviously, he's in great shape. We played a lot of sports together. His mother, he was a Jewish kid, and I was an Italian kid. The Italians didn't study. I'm not trying to overgeneralize stuff, Eric, but his mother was insistent that we'd study. She also knew that we had high metabolism, so she would order these Entenmann like coffee cakes and these Entenmann Danish rolls with the raspberry filling, and she would put them on the table, and she's like, you can't leave the house until you study. So if I didn't really meet Cynthia Magazine, my friend's mom, who was Jewish mom, very intent on academics and education, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. That's one of those vagaries, right? So he studied, he was my best friend, so therefore I studied. I started doing well in school. And so you know what happens. Once you start doing well at something, you want to keep that up. You want to continue to do well at it. I did well enough to get into Tufts, and then I had to borrow the money to go to Tufts, which was fine. I was also working over the summers. My dad's union actually got me it was an amazing part of the story. I'm always a big fan of unions, by the way. Even though I'm a Republican, I was a Republican primarily because my dad's union was tied into the Republican Party. It's a whole other topic. It's a little obscure. But the guy that my dad worked for in that union, they got me a summer job to help me get through college. And so I was getting paid $16 an hour, which I want you to convert that. It's about $90 an hour today to work on the dock in the town that I grew up in, working the hopper, shoveling sand, working a payloader while my dad was working that crane. And so that was very, very big for me because that almost paid for a semester's worth of college. I had to borrow the other half, and then I worked during the year while I was at Tufts. When I got into Harvard made it very easy. Thank God for that. They had a big endowment back then, way bigger today, but they let you borrow at these very low cost interest loans. They're lower today, frankly, because rates were higher back then, but that's how I got through school. So when you say I have a high vocabulary, I can tell you I did really shitty on the first SAT that I took. And I was told that I had a shitty vocabulary, so I had to autodidactically get myself going. I never took a Kaplan course or any of the SAT courses. My parents didn't have the money for that, but I did buy a couple of those SAT prep books.
Sure.
And I did start really skilling and scoring myself on vocabulary and trying to use it and trying to refine and move myself. But I still say a lot of curse words. And of course, I said something about Steve Bannon that got my ass fired in the White House. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood, and I was talking to a kid from my neighborhood. Everybody forgets that part of the story. His father was an Italian-American, worked in the same construction industry as my dad. Families knew each other for 50 years, but he decided to run to CNN with a recording of me saying something really fucking funny, but very off color. And so I got fired. So big deal.
I was about to say F-bombs are totally welcome on this show.
What I said about Steve Bannon was one of the worst people I've ever interacted with. Unfortunately, he's been pardoned now, so he'll be a menace to the American society until he does something more nefarious and gets jailed. But he's one of those megalomaniacal white Christian nationalists, total full-on racist, very, very bad human being. But what I said about him, he can't do because you'd have to do a lot of hot yoga to do what I said about him. And of course, Eddie Murphy once said that if he could do what I suggested about Steve Bannon, he would never leave the house. So, he definitely couldn't do what I said. But, look at Steve Bannon. I'm a pretty good judge of people. I can spot people pretty well. Look at what Steve Bannon's doing now. 2 years ago when I said, okay, there's something wrong with Donald Trump, look at how Donald Trump manifested himself over the last 25 months since I said that. So, I get things wrong. I shouldn't have been with Trump in the beginning, but at least as I tell my kids, this is a big lesson for people listening. If you get something wrong, I actually think it's okay to get things wrong. We're just human beings, but you can't stay wrong. You get something wrong, don't stay wrong. You got to have strength of character and move on and admit that you got something wrong,
I could not agree more with that. And I appreciate you owning that. By the way, I sent you a questionnaire before you came on the show. And one of the questions is, any regrets? And I don't know if you remember this, but you said, yeah, I wish the Scaramucci is 14 days rather than 11 days.
Yeah, I wrote that. Yeah.
But the thing is, you're now a unit of time.
Wow, the reason why I wanted to be 14 days because it's like if you're going to take a vacation, 11 days is probably not enough. 7 days is certainly not enough. So
you're right.
Eric, I wish you a full Scaramucci for your next vacation, but then it's like 11 days. So yeah, no, I wish. And by the way, I deserve to be fired. I'm not saying I didn't deserve to be fired. And so forth. I got fired after 11 days. And the big irony of the whole thing is the guy that fired me, General Kelly, him and I, Eric, have become very close friends. We go on speaking tour together. We've been to Abu Dhabi together. We were in Vegas together. I just got 3 weeks ago, I was in Iowa at a socially distant event with him. Some of it was virtual. Some of it was
not quite a Scaramucci ago.
Yeah, a little bit more, almost like
A little bit more.
almost 2 Scaramucci's ago, almost to the day. And
So,
look, the cool thing is I don't have any regrets about what happened, because you go through that, it either makes you stronger and wiser and more psychologically observant, and as I said, psychologically minded, or it doesn't. And I think it did for me. I think it was. And also, listen, I mean, I some ways I'm infamous, in other ways I'm well known. But the truth of the matter is, there's no way I could have all of these relationships today that I currently had I not had that high profile for that moment in time. So and again, I think that's helped me. It's benefited me. I have a broader set of friends, broader set of relationships, and by the way, I'm polarizing. If you watch MSNBC, Tiffany Cross
welcome
was coming.
to the club.
What's that? Yeah, Tiffany Cross was coming at me all guns a-blazing. I was once for Trump, and so even though I tried to help get him dislodged from the White House, I'm forever tarred in her mind. I have an orange tattoo on my forehead because of that. It's fine. I mean, let me tell you something. If you care, and it's impossible not to, so I don't want to be this sanctimonious prick that comes onto your podcast. I'm not going to say cliched things or this sort of saccharine nonsense to your listeners or viewers. But the one cliche that's resonating for me is what other people think about you is none of your business. And
your grandmother.
And it's impossible to live like that, because you always care about what other people think. We're a social organism, and people check their Instagram and they want to make sure they look right and blah, 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 all that stuff. So you always care. But man, let me tell you something. If you're going to stick your neck out in public life, and particularly politics, if you overly care, you're in the wrong goddamn business. You got to get out of that business, okay? You can't go into the NFL, put a helmet on, and say, "Hi, Tom Brady, how are you? I'm going to be your wide receiver. I'd like to catch one of your passes in the Super Bowl." And then he throws you the ball, and then Ronnie Lott's descendant comes into the secondary, smashes you, knocks you on your ass, gives you a concussion, and then you say, "Oh, I'm really upset about the game. God damn it, I got a concussion." You're on the field. So if you're entering politics at the White House level and you're in the press room answering questions from the press, and 11 days later you're fired, you know what I mean? Then, look, you got to get over it. You can't take it that serious.
So I have an expression that relates to entrepreneurship, which is you got to be in the game to make plays. And, I think it's important that you call plays and you run them. Now you got to see what the defense looks like and all that stuff. Maybe it's an audible. The thing about politics today, and I'm interested in your take on this, has it become too much about just being in the game as opposed to actually running plays? Because sometimes plays don't work. And it feels like nobody wants to run a play that doesn't work anymore.
Well,
there's incredible fear.
I don't want to be overly jaded, because I think what happens is I had a rough moment in politics, so then people, he's going to be overly jaded and bitter about it. No, I want to be as factually observant as possible. I would say, like everything in life, there are good people in politics. There are some good people. But for the most part, there are very bad people. They couldn't get jobs in the public sector. They couldn't get jobs doing certain things. And so they end up in politics. And now they've tasted a little bit of power. And now they get very expedient. They're more concerned about maintaining power. They're more concerned about sustaining power than they are actually serving. And so that's a problem. Kevin McCarthy, as an example, he's a complete tool. I've known Kevin for 15 years. I was a donor of Kevin's. Kevin has been to my conference. I've done fundraisers for Kevin. And something happened to him, a switch flipped, where he's like, okay, I need to be uber alles above everything else. I need to be the Speaker of the House. And so I'll do whatever it takes from an ambitious, expedient, moralist, principleless way to be the Speaker of the House. And so, flying down to see Trump, who's a criminal and a domestic terrorist and an insurrectionist, I guess he thinks that's helping his political career, but it hurts him as a human being. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a denier of things like the shooting at Parkland, where we have women being interviewed by Anderson Cooper, whose son was a teacher who stood in front of students and died to save some students' lives. We have Marjorie Taylor Greene telling people this conspiracy theory that the thing didn't happen or it was staged, okay? And she's raising money off of that. So, again, I don't want to come across bitter or cynical. I'm just trying to be observant. Yeah, there are good people, but there's a series of really bad things that are going on in American politics right now. And these people are more interested in ruling than they are serving. And that's why we're in the situation we're in. We could fix every one of these problems. Every problem that we have, and I'm going to say they're mostly man-made because it's mostly men in these positions. So you could say it's men and women made if you want to be politically correct, but it's mostly man-made. We could fix because man made the problem. And so therefore men can fix it. Men can put the right policy in place and fix it, but there's no will to do that. There's no discipline. There's no leadership. And it's a big problem. Kevin said to me once, Kevin McCarthy, this is real irony. I was sitting with him, I think it was at one of the luncheon tables in the Congressional Republican Club. And this is going back 10 years ago. He said, Anthony, in Washington, we have too many thermometers. We need thermostats in Washington. Oh, what do you mean, Kevin? Well, a thermometer takes a temperature. It's hot in here, so then they start speaking in hot terms to their people because they want to rile them up. It's cold in here, they'll speak cold terms, whatever they think is popular. But a thermostat, you go to the wall, you punch in the coordinates, and you guide the people to the temperature that they should be at. The problem in our society is we have too many thermometers, and we need more thermostats. Kevin, it's a great metaphor, a great analogy. I love what you're saying. That's real leadership. The people may not be with you, but you need to show them the way. What did Henry Ford say? If I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. They didn't realize I was going to come up with something that they would totally want. Steve Jobs said, if I ask my customers what they want, I'm going to make them what I think they want. You see what I mean? That's visionary. Kevin's a tool. He became this lecherous, cowardly tool. And, I don't know, could he make it to the Speaker of the House? Maybe, but he's going to take with him this weird MAGA factionalism loaded with white Christian nationalists, some of which insurrected at the Capitol, and some of which murdered a police officer, and some of which were calling for the death of our public servants. So I don't know how or why we're tolerating that. That really worries me for our society.
So you're a New Yorker. Congresswoman AOC is a New Yorker. If I get in a Twitter fight, who do I want in my corner first? You or her?
Well, she's got more followers than me, and she's got a pretty good snark to her. So
she's got good snark.
So I would say you probably want her over me because I think she's got good snark and she's got more followers and they move in a bee swarm. And so that might be pretty good on Twitter. But I think longer term, if you're thinking above and beyond Twitter, you probably want me, and as much as I like her work ethic and I admire her charisma, she's wrong-minded on so many policies and she has poor judgment when it comes to the execution of what she wants to do. She's talking about working class people and a working class struggle, but it's out of sync with the way the world really works. And so, the whole thing that she did with Amazon as an example was just ridiculous. We could have had Amazon in our backyard. Amazon.
It worked great for Nashville, by the way, though.
Yeah, we could have had 25,000 jobs and 150,000 a year plus in jobs, and we could have improved the whole economic landscape of that area of the city as a result of the help from Amazon. And yes, they wanted some tax abatements, but our tax policies here in New York are not competitive. I mean, taxes ultimately for a free market person or somebody that is guided by levels of free market principles are a price for goods and services. So if you're offering very low goods and services and very high taxes, that mixture doesn't work and you see people leaving. And so New York State has lost a lot of people over the last 3 or 4 years. I saw this meme, and I like Andrew a lot, Governor Cuomo. He's a good friend of mine. but it said this, the real estate Florida Realtor of the Year was a picture of Andrew Cuomo. It's a little bit snarky, but it's an implication that our policies are forcing people to leave. Now, if Andrew was on, he would say it's unfair. He's trying to cap taxes and he's trying to cut some of the corruption and stuff like that. But, something seismic has to happen. Otherwise, we'll be in a steady decline, which is unnecessary. If you look at the resources of New York, the location of the city, the depth of activity, the melting pot, the immigration story of New York City, the fountain of so much innovation, technological, financial, and otherwise, that New York has brought to the world, there's no reason why we need to put New York in decline. We just need the right policies.
By the way, you can tell him the next time he's trying to fend off that title for Florida real estate, he can just point at Governor Newsom.
Yeah. Well, Governor Newsom is at risk of being recalled, and but there again is a one-party system, right? So they run the roost in California, and what we find in one-party systems, they ultimately break, and they fall into themselves as a result of corruption. One-party systems, by the way, they have a life expectancy of about 70 years. You go to the Soviet Union, it was 1917 to 1989. You go to Japan, 70-year run, broke up. Malaysia, they just had a reversal of their one-party system. Mexico, about 20 years ago, reversed its one-party system. And so unfortunately, what ends up happening is if you got a layer of bureaucrats and politicians at the top that can stay there for very long periods of time without any circulation, it's rife for corruption. And so we have that system going on here in New York, and we have that system going on in California.
Let's talk about alternative assets now. So, one of the things that we try to do is enable access to alternative investment opportunities, which includes startup companies, later stage private companies, and then we can get into crypto as well, of course. But I think there's no question that you're an entrepreneur, and whenever you invest in a new idea, a new company, a new entrepreneur, I think it's important for the investor to understand the risk that they're taking when they do that. And so I was hoping you might talk to us a little bit about life as an entrepreneur and understanding the risk that you're taking when you get into that.
So I stayed up late Sunday into Monday morning on Clubhouse, which is this new social media app. Elon Musk was on. He's one of the most successful people in the world and a leading visionary, and probably one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, him and Jeff Bezos. He said that being an entrepreneur or starting a company is like eating broken glass while you're jumping off of a cliff trying to build an airplane. I thought it was a very interesting thing, because what happens when you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to start something, there's itinerant fear. There's fear of failure. There's fear of being judged by your social group. I can tell you the number of people that I worked with at Goldman, frankly, 30 years ago, still at Goldman, very, very successful people, very wealthy people, could have been amazing entrepreneurs, but they didn't want to take the risk of getting outside of that comfort zone. Again, I don't blame them. They've all done very, very well. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, there's something organic about that. There's something metaphysical about that. It requires a combination of stupidity, native intelligence, adaptability. It requires a lack of self-consciousness. And so if you fail a few times, which I have failed more than once, you have to figure out a way to fail upward, and you have to figure out a way to let it go off your back. And what I would say to people, my entrepreneurial career prepared me for my White House firing, because, when I got blasted out of the White House and put through the sewer pipe of the Shawshank Redemption, and then when I got out of the sewer pipe, they skinned me alive and they rolled me in broken glass and margarita salt. I got up and said, okay, no problem. I'm a crash dummy because I have this experience as an entrepreneur and I have this flexibility and neuroplasticity, and I can adapt myself. So I would tell people, if you want to be an entrepreneur, the good news for you is it's some of the most exciting things that you could experience in your life. The good news for you, even if you're not successful, the adrenaline rush of betting on yourself and the adrenaline rush of trying to create a collaboration with a group of teammates and to form that business, that adrenaline rush is second to none. And what I would tell you is that it's been the best part of my professional career, because even though I've had ups and downs, and if you talked to me in March of 2020, my fund was getting racked. We were missized in certain fixed income products. And it felt like it was going to be a really rougher experience than it ultimately was. I would say to you, still, I would rather do that than be in a big company somewhere. I'd like to create my own company or be with a team of people that can create my own company. And the last thing I'll say about being an entrepreneur is, yeah, you may see yourself as a capitalist, but you're actually a capital artist. Let's look at Jeff Bezos. His canvas, his 27 years life's work, which I would say is a masterpiece, was building Amazon.com, having the vision and seeing what Amazon could be as it related to the world of e-commerce, and having a really good long-term plan and hiring and training the right people. And of course, when he got things wrong, he got out of them, or he hired the wrong person, he fired them, and he continued to grow something that turned into Amazon.com. Now, I'm sure he's not a perfect guy. I'm sure he has his set of flaws. I've only met him once or twice, and it was very casually. But that's what being an entrepreneur is. You're an artist. Your canvas is your business, and you're painting on that canvas every single day. And the good news is your paintbrush has an eraser. So once in a while, you got to flip it over and, man, I'm going in the wrong direction, and try to repaint what you got going. And so I'm very happy with it. And by the way, if you're ever going to work in the White House and you're going to get your ass fired for doing something stupid, and there's a group of people in the society that want to cancel you. Well, if you're an entrepreneur, the good news is, well, it doesn't fucking matter. You go right back to your business. You can't cancel a guy like me. You're stuck with me whether you like me or not. I'm sort of like fungus, Eric. I'm growing on you, and I'm like, you can't get rid of me. I'm sort of with you.
That's really interesting. And the other thing that I like is sometimes you have to rip up the canvas and start again, which is
no question. A lot.
Which
got to do that a lot.
Yeah. I just had some, I'm getting old. I had a senior moment. So I was about to say something utterly fucking brilliant, and it just
you'll find it.
I did. I just found it, actually.
Okay.
Thank you for the help.
Yeah.
So, you said we get to bet on ourselves in this country. So I'd love to understand what you think about the regulatory restrictions we put on the average American and their ability to invest in private company opportunities or funds, for that matter, right? We say, hey, go ahead, pick a public company stock, go crazy, which we've seen go crazy in the last 10 days, but you're not allowed to bet on your friend who's starting a company. So I'm just kind of interested in your take on that.
Well, what do you mean by that? You're not allowed to bet on your friend. You can't raise.
So you have to be an accredited investor, right? So unless you're an accredited investor.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Oh, I see.
Right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, listen, that's something that we learn as we get older about the clumsiness of the government. Unfortunately, the government has these blunt instruments. And so when they make decisions like the one you're just describing, they're trying to protect people. The deleterious outcome of trying to protect people is that there's certain people that don't need to be protected that want to make that investment in their friend's company, and they're both going to do very well. So it's a problem. I'm not saying it isn't a problem, but I will say this: by and large, America has gotten lots and lots of things right. The decentralization of the government through the 50 states, the understanding of the uniform currency. So we had a 50-state free trading bloc, the integrity of the legal system. Donald Trump really was doing everything he could to wreck the country. At best, he's a useful idiot. If I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, he's a useful idiot for Vladimir Putin. But at worst, he's a paid operative. It's like one or the other. I mean, we'll have to figure that out over time, which one it actually was. But, the integrity of our legal system, all of this stuff was an amazing blueprint for a modern society of meritocrats. Not to say that there isn't an aristocracy in the country and there aren't people that have benefited from lucky sperm, but by and large, there has been tremendous amounts of mobility, tremendous amounts of upside opportunity for people. I can talk about my cousin, Augie, didn't go to college for whatever reason and built an auto glass business. He's a high school educated guy, but he's doing very, very well with his auto glass business. He's 36 years old and he's got a portfolio of real estate now that he's grown from the cash flow of that business, which is expounded. And that happens in America. America, Lee Kuan Yew said about America, don't write America off because, you can come to America in 5 short years, you're American. You're Italian American, you're Polish American, you're Singaporean American, but you can't go to Singapore or Germany or China or Japan and be a American Japanese. You can't do it. I mean, it doesn't happen. You could be an expat there and you'll get reasonable amount of treatment, but you won't integrate and fully assimilate into that society. So we have all of these major advantages. We can draw from the other 7 billion people and their intellectual capital and resources. Of course, you have to have the right politicians to put the immigration policy together appropriately. But all of these great things are there for us. Now, you're mentioning something that is not great. Sarbanes-Oxley, there's some positives to it when it came into power, 2002-3, but there's a lot more negatives to it. The Dodd-Frank legislation, there's some positives to it. But now you have these companies coming public in our society through SPACs, or they delay their public offerings, which in some ways hurts them because they're not getting access to that public capital that could help them grow. Amazon needed that access in the beginning because they were borrowing a lot as well to build that infrastructure, the web services, the factories, and having the publicly floated stock gave them more access to cheaper capital. So, you got pluses and minuses. We have to restore a lot of what I'm saying. A lot of this stuff has to be restored. We need an American renewal. We need people to start thinking about this in the appropriate way.
So, there were a number of interesting things in there, specifically with Sarbanes-Oxley. And, I think the result there has been that private companies will push an IPO out for about as long as they can because they don't want the headache. And I think the real loser in that scenario is actually the American investor. So where Amazon and Microsoft and some others were able to go public at sub-billion-dollar valuations, and the public market investor could enjoy the run-up to whatever those companies are worth today, $1 trillion, crazy. Today, companies aren't going public until they're worth tens of billions of dollars or even $100 billion, which means the delta that's going to be available once they hit that public market is no longer available to the public market investor, which means you have to be involved from a wealth creation standpoint while these companies are still private. The other interesting thing that you mentioned was this single form of currency in our 50 states. You started a Bitcoin fund for Skybridge. Can you talk to us a little bit about why you did that and what your sort of Bitcoin specific thinking is?
Yeah, well, I don't want to be too long-winded, but I looked at Bitcoin and studied it over the last 6 or 7 years. I'm an institutionalist by nature as a money manager. And so I wasn't ready to embrace Bitcoin at its startup. And frankly, any more than I would have been willing to embrace even Amazon at its startup. But at year 10 or 12 in Amazon, I can tell you, you could look at Amazon at year 10 or 12. It's a mature company. It's a brand. That's a 2009 time frame, just to set the time scale. And you could have looked at it and said, okay, well, the stock is too high. But yet if you bought Amazon 12 years ago and you held it for the last 12 years, you had a 64x return in Amazon. So it turned out it wasn't too high and it wasn't too late. In fact, if anything, it was early. How many of us wish we could go back to 2009 and just buy Amazon? And I think you have that opportunity with Bitcoin because Bitcoin is scaling as a global monetary network. You have to understand what currency is and what money is in our society. And there's a few postulates. Number one, whatever you're transferring between two people is worth less than the goods and services. Okay, so I have a piece of paper in my pocket. It's green. It's actually made out of cotton. It's got numbers on it. I can hand it to somebody. They'll give me a pizza or they'll cut my grass. The piece of paper itself is worthless. Okay, yet we've assigned $100 to it, and we roughly all know what the purchasing power is of that. By the way, that's in my neighborhood, that's an Italian single, just so everybody's aware of what that actually is. Okay, and so now you have that, and it's going back and forth between people, and it's been debased. It's not linked to metals or anything like that. It's just a fiat currency, a currency by decree from the federal government, but we've accepted it. And so that's the axiomatic fact of 5,000 years of history of money. It's wampum, it's seashells, it's paper, it's digital numbers in a bank account that you could put up on your screen. You see those numbers. Okay, I'm going to move some of those numbers to Mercedes, and then tomorrow Mercedes is going to deliver me a car, but they're just digits in an account. But we've done this ledger. We have a belief system tied to the ledger, and we have a ledger of transferring value between each other. That's what money is. If you tell me it's anything different than that, please chime in. But that's really what it is. And so now you would expect, like everything in life, technological advancements are improving the way we do things. We're talking to each other over Zoom. We could probably do that 15 years ago. Our parents had a phone that had a rotary basis to it. We have a smartphone where we have a mini computer, more computing power than put Neil Armstrong on the moon. And so lo and behold, we have this innovation related to transfer of value or a international standard, a ledger between people. Now, it was tried with DigiCash. It didn't work. That's sort of the MySpace. But it got perfected with Bitcoin because it's an open source code. It's limited. It's scarce. There's 21 million coins. And all of a sudden, you can see the perfection of what was created. And now the question is, will people start to adhere to it? And the answer was yes. We had early adopters, and we had people that were trying to get the network established and create the visibility for the network. And 12 years later, you have 140 million users. Secondary factor important to me, it's being taxed and regulated. And the third factor is in something like Bitcoin, if you really understand it, you have cryptographs, you have these codes that are worth money, that we've ascribed value to these codes. They're scarce, but now you have to store them. And the best way to store them is through cold storage, meaning unplugging them from the internet and putting them in a server so they can't be hacked into. And Fidelity Digital Assets is doing that for us. And so when all three of those things came together, Eric, I said to myself, okay, this is the future. This will have a role as a store of value. You know, gold, people will say, well, gold can be melted. It can be turned into jewelry. It has some manufacturing value. Yes, but that's a fraction of what the overall price is for gold. Gold has a $12 trillion market cap, but we've put that in our lexicon, our vernacular, our culture as a store of value. I think Bitcoin is there now. And I think Bitcoin will scale from its $700, $800 million of market capitalization to look and feel like digital gold. In fact, I would argue that Bitcoin is better at being gold than gold is at being gold. And so I'm a big believer in it long term. And so I put my money where my mouth is. I put $25 million of our firm's equity into the Bitcoin fund. I put another $400 million across our platform into clients' funds. And I'm out there trying to explain to people what it is. And since I'm an institutionalist, I'm going slow. But I want to be on the frontier of this because I think this is very similar to Facebook as a social network, Google as a search and advertising network, Amazon as a retail network. Bitcoin is a decentralized monetary network. And as it gets adopted, the value of those coins is going to go up. Those coins are going to become very, very valuable to a very large group of people who will see them as a store of value akin to gold. And they will see continued debasement in this. There are 23.6% more of these US dollars in the world than there was 6 months ago. And by the way,
the Fed has an infinite reserve of those.
Yeah, and by the way, they're going to make more of them because they have to. They have to figure out a way to make more of them. And so therefore, I can tell you, if you're a smart person listening and you're looking at your bank account and this is a store of value for you, well, what's happening is because of the production of these, you're going to need more of these to buy that Hamptons real estate. You're going to need more of these to buy that Picasso. You're going to need more of these to buy things that are scarce. So I'm recommending people
more of those to buy shoes.
Yeah. So I'm saying put some of these in Bitcoin, and I think that you'll be rewarded by that as people start to create that scale of acceptability.
So I have one question from my researcher that I'd love to ask. My researcher is my 20-year-old daughter who unfortunately can't return to campus just yet. And it's about Amazon and Bezos. And I think we've all seen the $10 billion pledge to climate change. She's wondering about the seeming hypocrisy in that donation for the good of the people relative to the way he's combating unionization, which you are a fan of and supporter of. So just wondering if you have any sort of off-the-cuff thoughts on that.
Well, I would say something that's probably not the best thing to say, but it's an observation that's realistic, is that the human being, I didn't meet Jesus. I mean, I'm a Catholic. I have faith in my religion, but I never met Jesus. So maybe he's the perfect human. I don't know. But from what I could tell from the Bible, he was probably flawed too, based on the stories. And I haven't met any human beings that are perfect. And I would say that every human being is an enigma wrapped in a riddle inside of a hypocritical sandwich. And so what am I going to tell your daughter is, I'm sorry to tell you that this is how things work in our society. The society is unfair. Life is unfair. People are hypocritical. Some of what Bezos is doing is for optics, and some of it's doing for karma. But at the end of the day, he's flying around on his private jet, burning up the atmosphere while he's doing that. And he thinks that the best mousetrap for his business right now is to fight those unions, because if he can pay those workers less, more earnings go to the bottom line, and that improves his stock performance and makes him richer and makes his company shareholders better. And so are we going to culturally shift away from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, where the person working at the company is empowered and we have some rights there to protect that person? We make sure that person's got a really good wage, even if it's off the market. I certainly want to do that. I think that's an important thing to do. Are we there now? No. And if we're not careful, if we don't get there using the market, what I would say to your daughter is the government may try to enforce it from the top down. And we just got done having that discussion. The government's quite ponderous. They'll make foolish decisions in the effort to try to do the right thing, and there'll be very bad, deleterious, non-market-based outcomes. So
speaking of kids,
yeah,
will you share your son's late night compilation of the Scaramucci skits and jokes?
No, let me tell you something, man. I'm so happy that has not gotten out. I mean, that was brutal. Fuck, was that brutal? But by the way, he's probably holding that over me. If you want to put money, he just started a new fund. If you want to put money, he's a total whore. If you want to put money in his new fund, he just graduated from Stanford. He'll probably give it up. You know what I mean? But he holds that over me. But it was some really funny shit. If your viewers like this sort of nonsense, they should go to Amazon and buy the Mooch documentary for like $3. Somebody made a documentary of me a couple of years ago. It is lots of shenanigans, man. And a lot of that stuff is in that documentary, by the way.
Hey, Anthony, thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for sharing your experiences. And I really appreciate you coming on to the show.
Great to be here with you. And I wish you great success, and hopefully you'll invite me back.
Hey, thank you.
All right. Be well, Eric. Thank you again.
The Altogether Show is brought to you by Alto IRA. Alto knows that the public markets offer insufficient diversification of retirement accounts. That's why Alto developed a streamlined platform to make it easy and cost-effective for anyone to invest their tax-advantaged retirement savings in alternatives. Assets like real estate, VC, and crypto that are outside of the public markets and available through Alto's 21 platform partners. To learn more, visit altoira.com.